Good morning, participants. We request that if you were to switch on your camera, make sure that your surroundings are in a condition where you would like for them to be viewed by other people. This is live on several social media channels. Further, if you take the floor, kindly introduce yourself and the organization that you come from or that you represent. Regarding interpretation, English is 1, French is channel 2, Portuguese is channel 3. Kindly mute original audio and select the language of your choice. Welcome to this webinar, which will be focused on a consultation geared at getting the input of youth in the SADC region and beyond. As you're well aware, we are meeting to discuss the SADC model law on prison oversight, which is a model law that has been developed by the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and consultations form part of the interventions. Without further ado, I would like to recognize Dr. Vivian Joseph, Mr. Kelvin Wessel, Ms. Annika Mekota, who is the lead consultant for the development of the SADC model law. We also have two young people, Mr. Chira Matlaku and Ms. Omtle Ntsingala, who will add their views in relation to the subject matter today. At this point, allow me to welcome to take the floor Dr. Vivian Joseph, a public health advocate and the head of the Southern Africa Youth Forum. You may remove the program, Ronald.
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished participants, Secretary General Ms. Boemo Sekoma, representatives of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, my fellow youth leaders, and esteemed colleagues. This is such a great honor for the young people of Southern Africa to contribute to the SADC model law on prison oversight. My name is Dr. Vivian Justin Joseph, as mentioned, and I'm honored to join you today representing the Southern African Youth Forum, where I serve as the Health Cluster Lead. SAYOF, Southern African Youth Forum, is a regional youth platform working across all 16 countries of the SADC member states to strengthen youth voices in governance, health, and social justice through its different clusters, and I representing one of them being the Health Cluster. I'm deeply grateful to the SADC Parliamentary Forum for recognizing the value of youth perspectives in shaping the SADC model law on prison oversight. And this is a step that truly embodies the forum's commitment to the inclusivity, human rights, and transformative justice. And as young people, we believe that dignity is vital for each and every human being. It is a human right, and it must be held with confines of a prisons, even within the walls of a prison. And the youth of Southern Africa envision prisons not as spaces of punishment, but as environments of rehabilitation, restoration, and reintegration. In my brief presentation, I will reflect on why youth involvement is essential in designing this model law, the key challenges faced by young inmates in our region, and how the model law can embed stronger oversight and accountability mechanisms to ensure humane and right-based prison systems across SADC. The need of a robust framework governing prison oversight has never been more urgent, particularly in the Southern African Development Community. And this region is where a lot of challenges are faced by inmates, especially the youth, being both pressing and multifaceted. We acknowledge SADC PF and partners for initiating this model law process. The proposed SADC model law offers a vital opportunity to address these challenges and promote safer, right-based prisons environments across the region. As I say, dignity is vital, dignity is sacrosanct, and it's sanctimonious. And this shows that it must be held up even within the confines of a prison. Prisons, as I said, it shouldn't serve as places of punishment, rather a place of rehabilitation, reintegration, and of course, it should be conducive for correction. And it aligns both as regional and continental best practices that will emphasize the importance of treating inmates with respect and humanity. Young inmates, in particular, are often vulnerable to stigma, discrimination, sexual harassment, victimization, and making it imperative that the SADC model law incorporates provisions that specifically safeguard their rights and well-being. When we foster a culture of oversight that prioritizes human dignity, we can transform prisons into spaces where rehabilitation is not just an ideal, but a tangible reality. Through the lens of youth perspectives, this presentation aims to illuminate the critical need of young offenders in our society. It is essential to recognize that youth represent a substantial portion and I will share now the challenges that young inmates are facing in the prisons across the SADC region. Suffer from severe overcrowding, leading to inadequate living conditions, lack of rehabilitation programs, insufficient access to educational and vocational training programs, hinders personal development and reintegration prospects. Stigma and discrimination. Young inmates often face societal stigma, making reintegration into the community difficult post-release. Mental health issues. This is something that is actually of a priority for young people, not only in the prison, but also across the whole region, even outside prison. There's a limited access to mental health services that exacerbates the existing psychological challenges affecting the overall well-being of these young inmates. Physical health risks. Poor sanitation and overcrowded conditions increase the risk of communicable diseases and they limit the access to necessary health care. Victimization and abuse. Young inmates may be more vulnerable to violence and abuse from older inmates and staff, compromising their safety. Isolation from family and community. Long distances from home and limited visitation rights create emotional distress and hinder support from family. Lack of legal representation. Many young inmates do not have access to adequate legal counsel, impacting their ability to defend their rights. Inadequate training for staff. The prison staff may lack training on how to effectively manage and rehabilitate young offenders, leading to misunderstandings and mistreatment. Limited access to confidentiality. It is very important that young people should not struggle to maintain their confidentiality during their legal or oversight visits, because this can lead to deter them from expressing their concerns. Poor nutritional standards. Inadequate food quality and quantity can lead to health problems, which affects both their physical and mental health. Substance abuse. Many young inmates may struggle with substance abuse issues, which are often not adequately addressed within the prison systems. Addressing these challenges is essential for creating a more humane and effective prison environment that supports the rehabilitation of young inmates across the SADC region. So, what are recommendations from the youth perspective? The recommendations are going to help not only to help the young inmates but also that are currently in the prison walls, but rather even for the generation that we're looking forward to correct and rehabilitate them and making sure that we're centering them for correction. And one of the several key strategies that we young people believe is going to foster this change and the culture of the oversight in prison is one being clear legal framework. We believe that establishing a comprehensive legal standards that define the roles and responsibilities of oversight bodies, ensuring accountability and transparency in prison operations. Inclusive stakeholder engagement. Involving a diverse range of stakeholders, including civil society, youth representatives, and human rights organizations in the oversight process to ensure multiple perspectives are considered. And this step is one of them. Regular training and capacity building. We believe that providing ongoing training for prison staff and oversight bodies on human rights principles, restorative justice, and rehabilitation practices to enhance their ability to monitor conditions effectively. Independent monitoring systems or mechanisms. In creating independent oversight bodies, will empower to conduct regular inspections, interviews, and assessments of prison conditions, ensuring that young inmates' rights are respected. Data collection and reporting. Implementing systems for collecting and analyzing data on prison conditions, inmate treatments, and oversight activities enable the evidence-based decision-making and accountability. Transparent reporting processes. The mandate public reporting of oversight findings, including recommendations for improvement to foster accountability and encourage public scrutiny, for prison systems. Feedback mechanisms for inmates. Establishing confidential channels for inmates to voice concerns and report abuses without fear of reprisal, ensuring their perspectives inform oversight efforts. Focusing on rehabilitation and reintegration. By emphasizing the importance of rehabilitation programs within the oversight framework, it ensures that prisons focus on preparing the young inmates for a successful reintegration into the society. Promotion of human rights culture. By cultivating a culture of respect for human rights within prisons, it will ensure that all staff and stakeholders prioritize the dignity and well-being of inmates, that is now the young inmates. Collaboration within the regional and international bodies. Through engagement with regional and international human rights organizations to adopt best practices and standards, fostering a culture of compliance and accountability. And among other, we do have independent monitoring bodies that can ensure young inmates' rights are respected through several effective strategies, which we do have a few that I will present to you all. And we do have the regular inspections by conducting unannounced visits to prisons to assess conditions, treatment of young inmates and all inmates, and compliance with legal standards. It will allow for objective evaluation. Comprehensive assessment frameworks. By developing and implementing standardized assessment tools that evaluate various aspects of inmate care, including health, safety, and access to rehabilitation programs. Confidential interviews. As I said earlier, and I will emphasize again, that facilitating private discussions with inmates to gather first-hand accounts of their experiences, enabling them to voice concerns about their treatment without fear of retaliation. Collaboration with legal experts. Working alongside legal professionals to ensure that monitoring practices align with national and international human rights laws provides legal support to inmates when needed. Reporting mechanisms. Creating clear channels for inmates to report abuses and grievances ensures these mechanisms are accessible and confidential to encourage reporting. Public disclosure of findings. By publishing reports on monitoring activities, including findings and recommendations, to promote transparency, accountability, while raising public awareness of inmate rights issues. Engagement with stakeholders. Through collaboration with civil society organizations, human rights, and advocates, families of inmates to gather diverse perspectives and advocate for reform where necessary. Training and capacity building. Through the provision of training for prison staff on human rights standards and best practices, fostering a culture of respect for inmates' rights within the prison environment. Follow-up mechanisms. The establishment of procedures for following up on previous recommendations to ensure identified issues are addressed and inmates' rights are continuously upheld. Advocacy for policy reform. By the use of insights gained from monitoring activities to advocate for changes in laws and policies that enhance the protection of inmate rights and improve prison conditions. And in conclusion, the need for a comprehensive and right-based approach to prison oversight in the SADC region is paramount, particularly in addressing the unique challenges faced by young inmates. As we have discussed, these issues such as overcrowding, lack of rehabilitation programs, the stigma associated with incarceration hindering the reintegration of youth into the society. A transformative SADC model law has the potential to create a more humane prison environment that upholds human dignity and fosters rehabilitation. The Southern African Youth Forum, SIOF, and the SADC Youth Parliament stand ready to complement the efforts of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, the SADC PF, in determination and adoption of this model law. We must leverage the voices and insights of young people to ensure that the perspectives of youth are central to the legislative processes. Together, we can advocate for a prison system that not only respects the rights of young inmates, but also supports their journey towards reintegration and positive contributions to the society. As we move forward, let us commit to fostering a culture of oversight that prioritizes human rights and rehabilitation, paving the way for a brighter future for all young individuals within the SADC region. Thank you for your attention. and I look forward to our collective efforts in making meaningful change. Thank you, SADC PF, for providing these spaces for the youth voices. Thank you, Your Excellency Boemosek Goma, for this great honor of the young people in the region. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vivian. Thank you so much for creating the context, for bringing forward the consultation of the Youth Parliament and the SAYOF. We appreciate the submissions that you have made, and indeed, we believe that this will go a long way in ensuring that the framework that has been developed, which aligns with what you have been articulating, can indeed foster the mechanism that is required for prison oversight by members of parliament. And we hope that the young people will assist us as part of this accountability mechanism to ensure that all vulnerabilities, all violations are contained. With these words, I'd like to thank you and wish you a fruitful afternoon or morning, so to speak. Now I'd like to invite to the floor another young person who, by the name of Mr. Calvin Wessels. He's the head of policy and legal affairs at the New Elementary Namibia.
Good morning. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Kevin. Do you mind switching on your camera? Is it possible?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good
Go
morning. I stand on the protocol observed by Dr. Vivian. Morning, everybody. It is a privilege to join you today. I am Kevin Wessels. I'm from New Elementary Namibia. I'm also part of the technical working group on the SADC model law on prison oversights. I'm privileged to be here today and to speak to you on prison oversights, in particular to discuss how the law speaks to youth and the justice system in our region. The model law on prison oversight comes at a crucial time for Southern Africa. Across the SADC region, prison systems continue to grapple with overcrowding, inadequate healthcare, and weak accountability structures. These challenges are systems of a broader systematic issues within our justice systems, issues that often fail to protect the most vulnerable, including youth. The justice systems in many SADC countries remain heavily punitive rather than rehabilitative, as previously mentioned. Young or youthful offenders, often first-time or low-level offenders, are caught in cycles of arrest and detention that do little to address the underlying causes of crime, such as poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion. Data from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum and the African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights shows that across Southern Africa, young and youthful people make up significant proportion of prison population, yet few facilities are dedicated to youth correctional programs or specialized rehabilitated services. Within this reality, the SADC PF model law on prison oversight provides a groundbreaking opportunity to shift the regional narrative from punishment to protection, from containment to accountability, and from invisibility to inclusion. The model law is designed to strengthen oversight mechanisms within correctional systems by setting out clear standards, mandates, and responsibilities for oversight bodies. It promotes transparency, accountability, and the protection of human rights in line with international instruments such as the UN Convention Against Torture, the Nelson Mandela Rules, and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. What is particularly commendable in this model law is that it recognizes vulnerable and minority groups, including women, persons with disabilities, and those at risk of discrimination. However, youth, though referenced in several provisions of this model law, require more explicit and intentional inclusion as a distinct category of vulnerability. Oversight bodies under the model law are expected to, of course, monitor conditions of the inmates, access to healthcare and education, and of course, the treatment of the inmates and compliance with national and international standards. Yet, as the position paper rightly observes, oversight mechanisms are only as effective as their ability to engage with lived realities of those inside. For many youthful people, this means ensuring oversight goes beyond inspection checklist and instead captures experiences of stigma, victimization, and neglect. We will then look at youth in justice and correctional systems. Youth often face particular vulnerabilities in our justice systems. Many are detained with adults, as previously mentioned by Dr. Vivian, which is a direct violation of international law and best practices. They are often subjected to abuse, lack of education, poor nutrition, and limited mental health support. Moreover, rehabilitation is too often reduced to routine labor rather than genuine empowerment. Oversight bodies must therefore look for evidence of education, skills training, psychosocial support, and reintegration programs that prepare youth for life beyond prison. We must also remember that young correctional officers face unique pressures. Working within rigid hierarchies and under stressful, sorry, somebody said I'm a bit too fast. I'll slow down a bit. We must also remember that youth correctional officers face unique pressures. Working within rigid hierarchies and under stressful conditions that easily normalize violence and apathy. Oversight should also equally extend to staff well-being, ethics, and training, recognizing that human treatment or humane treatment must be modeled and not merely mandated. The role of oversight should include protection, participation, and prevention. To effectively include youth, oversight bodies should act through three guideline principles: protection, ensuring safe, separate, and youth-friendly facilities for young inmates, access to healthcare, and confidential complaints system. Participation, engaging young people in monitoring processes, hearing their voices through visits, and including their perspectives in oversight reports. When we look at prevention, we look at identifying risks early, especially those that lead to radicalization, abuse, and recidivism, and ensuring that recommendations lead to systematic reforms. All these three approaches that I just mentioned above align with Article 37 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child and African Charter of the Rights of Welfare of Children and Young People, both of which oblige states to protect youth in conflict with the law from cruel or degrading treatment and to prioritize rehabilitation over punishment. What would be the way forward? For oversight to work, we must invest in independent and well-resourced institutions to ensure public reporting and to empower parliamentary committees to follow up on these recommendations that would normally be given. The model law should also inspire SADC member states to develop national implementation frameworks that address youth-specific realities, including the disaggregated data collection, access to legal aid, and aftercare programs for reintegration into society, back into society. Most importantly, youth justice must not be seen as a side issue. It is a measure of moral integrity of our systems and societies. A region that imprisons its youth without offering them rehabilitation is a region that imprisons its own future. To close off, I will just say, as we refine and domesticate the model law, I urge us to keep our focus not only on compliance, but on compassion and transformation. Oversight, at its best, is about restoring humanity where it has been lost, ensuring that every young person that is behind a cell is seen, heard, and given a second chance. Let us remember the words of the late Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity, unquote. Through this model law and through our collective efforts as SADC partners, we have the power to ensure the promise of justice that truly reaches every corner of our region, including its youth and the most forgotten. I thank you and I close off.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And I believe I speak on behalf of the participants. I'm quite overjoyed by the fact that you have represented the legal fraternity very well. These are the movements that really will play a significant role in the discourse relating to the consolidation of this particular model law. And in addition, to ensure that the democratic drive in the SADC region is sustained. The model law and the SADC Parliamentary Forum, including democratization, are dependent on social and intellectual movements, such as human rights lawyers that you represent. We'll continuously discuss these themes, including looking at the rule of law, constitutionalism, and respect for human rights, all of which have inherent linkages to prison oversight. Thank you very much for articulating this particular area of intervention in the model law. I would like to find out if there are any questions at this point. If you have them, kindly note them down so that after the consultant has more or less been able to present her intervention, we'll be able to take those after. So at this point, I'll move on to inviting the legal drafter, a renowned advocate and litigator in Southern Africa. She works for the Southern Africa Litigation Center, with whom the SADC Parliamentary Forum has collaborated and engaged in the development of the SADC model law in prisons. Annika, you may kindly take the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much. As all protocols observed, I will take you briefly through the outline of the SADC model law in terms of what is proposed to be in it. You would have received some background information already, and I want to really thank the presenters, Dr. Joseph and Mr. Wessels, who have really clearly outlined those aspects that ought to be included in the model law, and that we will certainly take note of as the model law is developed. So let me just share my screen. One second. So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, thank you. So I will briefly take you through what the main issues are that the model law will deal with. So just to note that, because as the presenters before me had mentioned, the model law is specifically around prison oversight. So it does not deal with conditions in detention and standards, minimum standards for conditions in places of detention, because those are already dealt with in the laws within our countries in SADC, as well as in international and regional frameworks. So I'll take you through some of the key issues. Now, what the model law wants to do is establish very clear principles around how oversight ought to happen. And again, these are not exhaustive lists, but it ought to include issues around both prisons and oversight bodies being accountable for what they do and being transparent in how they conduct themselves. And as mentioned by the presenters, that they uphold human rights and dignity. It's critical that oversight mechanisms are independent and that they empower prisoners. And here I note what the presenters had specifically emphasized around the empowerment of youth who are often sidelined and particularly vulnerable within these institutions. And so youth ought to really be considered as a vulnerable group, but within them, they might also face various other vulnerabilities and a cross-section of vulnerabilities. What is important is that there are remedies for when prisoners experience abuse. There ought to be a mandatory reporting of certain key issues, such as deaths in prisons or misconduct or violations. And it's important that there is systemic monitoring to ensure that standards are met in prisons. At the moment, this is not the case, and this is precisely why there's a need for a SADC model law to ensure that across our prisons and across the entire region, our conditions of detention are harmonized and are in accordance with international and regional law. So in addition, there are various other aspects that ought to be considered relating to coordination between oversight mechanisms, and also very clearly about how one consider the mental health of persons in detention, their reintegration and rehabilitation, like the previous presenters have mentioned. So one aspect of prison oversight is that prisoners have the ability to lodge complaints where they experience certain problems. And within the prison system, there's both an internal complaint system, but prisoners ought to also have access to external complaints mechanisms. And there must be measures taken to follow up on those complaints and to resolve them. So just the issue of complaints management itself is then dealt with within the model law. And I just want to note specifically around the internal requests that what is critical is that there's a complaints process within a prison that is fair, equal, and unbiased, and that is able to address issues of stigma and discrimination when they arise. And this is very important when it comes to youth, because youth are not always taken seriously within the prison system, and they might well feel that their complaints are sidelined, or they might struggle to raise those complaints in a way that they are taken seriously. And that is why any complaints mechanism need to ensure that it is unbiased and does not discriminate against prisoners lodging complaints on the basis of their age, and supports them to make complaints where they might find it challenging to do so for any sort of reason. So that's the one area where important principles ought to be considered. So in addition to internal complaints processes, the model law will look at the various independent oversight mechanisms that exist, and to note that there's never really only one oversight mechanism. There are various mechanisms, and it's important that each of them operate properly. So for example, model laws provide for official visitors, which can, for example, be members of parliament, who should be able to visit places of detention and see whether they comply with standards. If in a country you have a youth council, for example, that youth council ought to also be declared an official visitor so that they are able to access places of detention easily to ensure that they meet the minimum standards and that they consider the needs of youth within those facilities. Then another oversight mechanism is that of visiting justices. This mechanism exists throughout SADC, where judges are obliged to visit places of detention to see whether those places comply with minimum standards, and also to see whether or not there are any persons in detention who ought not to be there, either because they ought to have received bail, or where their pretrial custody time limits have been exceeded, or where there's been no process to really bring them before the courts. Another oversight mechanism that exists throughout SADC is national human rights institutions. This includes both human rights commissions and ombudspersons. And the Ombud and the Human Rights Commission in all their legislation are designated to visit places of detention. And the key area that the model law would want to strengthen is the ways in which facilities and departments consider the reports made by human rights commissions and implement the recommendations. In some countries, there are independent correctional center visiting committees. These are useful because they often comprise committees that are designated by an oversight body to conduct visits in their vicinity. And here it would be important that youth form part of those visiting committees so they consider the needs of youth. And with these committees, there ought to be sufficient training of the independent visitors so that they know what to look out for. So, for example, the presenters mentioned that there are specific issues around mental health, substance use, vulnerabilities around violence and those sort of things that any oversight body ought to be trained to look into when they visit a prison. Finally, there's also designated independent correctional oversight bodies. This is when a country decides to put in place a body that's sole purpose would be to visit places of detention, to monitor that they follow local international standards, and to ensure that they listen and adhere to recommendations made by the body. This body would also investigate instances of abuse and report directly to Parliament. So this is one way in which one can improve prison oversight, and it would important and countries have started adopting these independent correctional oversight bodies. There are, in some places, a country can decide to create a commission of inquiry. So all countries are legally enabled to open a commission of inquiry into a systemic problem. And this can include systemic problems within prisons themselves. And then health professionals who work or who come across prisoners or work within prisons themselves ought to have certain reporting obligations if they see that certain prisoners are vulnerable to violence. Then the model laws makes provision for some groups who might be vulnerable. Now, this list is not a list of all the people who are vulnerable, because there are many people who are vulnerable in different ways. But the list sets out some additional considerations when engaging with certain vulnerable groups. So, for example, that if an oversight body visits a facility where there are persons with different types of disability, the oversight body ought to be able to communicate with those individuals and assess adequately whether their needs are met. So I'm just pointing out one of the examples would be that an oversight body needs to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to deal with sexual violence. And youth are at a particular risk when it comes to sexual violence. And that includes that there must be proper internal procedures, there must be confidentiality of reporting channels, there must be the immediate referral to trained investigators. There must not be any risk of reprisals for people who do lodge complaints, and there must be immediate access to emergency medical care and mental health support. And then importantly, we need data, and this must Mr. Wessels referred to that as well, disaggregated data about what happens in prisons so that we can see if particular groups are affected and that those groups can then be supported. And this links us to the issue of mandatory reporting and the need for that sort of disaggregated data on deaths, on violence, on torture, on health issues within a prison facility, so that parliaments and oversight bodies are able to make recommendations that are based on the factual situation within a facility. And then finally, the model law will speak a bit to how parliaments can properly consider the reports of all these various oversight bodies and support them and support the implementation of their recommendations. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anneke. I believe that those who have been listening and those who have made contributions can see the synergies and have particularly listened to what the consultant was zeroing in. Yes, we'll receive all your requests. However, like in any lawmaking process, we are not going to be able to take everything on board, but we recognize your input as offshoots that may inform other processes as the model law is being developed or post-adoption strategy. And I believe that that clarity of thought is critical, as has been presented, and that at the end of the day, as young people, you'll be able to make inroads into these submissions and continue to make your input as the case may be. So I'll invite any questions or interventions from the floor directed at the consultants or our two speakers, but mainly really at the consultant because she holds the reins that pulls together the threads of the focus of the model law. You may wish to raise your hand. I see Shomari Mukanjwa, and I also see Denzel Water. Let me see. In that order, kindly take the floor. Please introduce yourself and the organization or constituency that you represent.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sure.
thank you very much.
Yeah,
yeah thank you very much, Chair, and colleagues, fellow Africans. Dumelang Sambonan, Shomari Mukanjwa from DRC, living in South Africa. I'm representing Southern Congolese Solidarity Campaign. Is a Congolese civil movement residing or operating in South Africa as well as in DRC and other part of southern regions, southern country regions. However, let me just thank the presenters, the two young men, and the young man and the young Dr. Vivian. Thank you very much for your presentation, as well as the last speaker was presented now. I have a few questions, but let me just dwell on one to leave a space of other people to speak. Mine will be, I see you spoke a lot regarding the protections of young people in prisons, but I didn't see anywhere in your presentations, all of you, where you see after a person has committed a crime, because a person finds himself in prison, it's not out of nothing. It's not just apprehended, put in prison for no reason. There must be a reason why a person is put in prison. And our law, modern law, should not be lenient to any person, be it young or old, to be allowing him a space to commit more crime. When I read through what we are presenting now, it seems like the model law that you want to formulate is so lenient that Any criminal should do whatever they want as long as the age permit him to do that, he will get protection, according to my understanding. I'm sorry, maybe I'll be overlap of what you have mentioned. So did you take in your considerations the crime of a person that led him or her to be in prison? How do you want it to be so sympathetic to a person who have committed crime, killing people, for example, even if it's a young age? Because we see most of the crime committed in Africa, Southern Africa and South Africa in particular, is committed by young people, not old people. The data are there. So do you want us to be so sympathetic for a person who have committed a crime, killing people, raping women, just because of is a young person? Should be so, the laws must be so lenient to him or her because of her age or his age? I think you should go there in the review. Secondly, you didn't speak about after committing crime, there's two parts who are both victim of the crime. Of course, the family of the victim. How do you think the government or SADC region countries should also compensate the people who are victim of the crime committed by young people? Because I think we are speaking about young people normally. My last one, Chair, is about the training in prisons. It is very good. I understand we should not render prisoner to be a punishment, a place of punishment. Maybe we should look another terminology, because I know a prison is a place where somebody who has committed the crime to be put there to be punished. Can we look another terminology instead of using prison? Then we look another alternative that will be a little bit lenient to the people who are committing less crime, not heinous crime. Those who committed heinous crime should meet the full might of the law despite their age or their sex. And those who commit less crime, for example, stealing a chicken, those one maybe we should find a way for them not to be associated or put together with the prisoners who are co-criminals, those who are committing heinous crime, raping women and other things that we all don't want to see in our society. I think instead those are my few comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shamari. I'll take the questions as indicated earlier, and then I'll hand over. The next one was Mr. Denzel Wata, and then the last one will be Caroline Kabiru, and then we'll hand over to the consultants. I believe there are members of the technical working group here. Some of the issues that are raised are really, yeah, something that they can also. I've seen your hand, Alvin Gukuta, and yeah. Annika, should I take all of them or stop somewhere so that you can follow through? Kindly guide.
I'm taking notes, so you're welcome to take all of
Okay,
the
that's
questions.
fine.
Yes.
So we proceed, including Ms. Alvin Gukuta. Let's proceed in that fashion. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Denzel Wata with the SRHR Africa Trust Youth Hub, Zimbabwe. My point is focused on health-focused reintegration back into society. So in order for young people to be able to successfully reintegrate into society, they need to have certain means. So in addition to providing services and trainings, I would also add for official certification to come with the life skills training that young people are going to be receiving whilst in incarceration. And in addition to that, companies and organizations and institutions to be mandated to have a certain percentage of their employment to be young people in incarceration. This will help young people post-incarceration to be able to fend for themselves and afford the health services. Also, in the issue of health services, especially SRHR and mental health services, I would actually propose that there be a certain period of time where young people who were in incarceration can access free medical services after their release whilst they are trying to reintegrate back into society. And then lastly would be the inclusion of counselors and regular counseling sessions with young people in incarceration during incarceration and for a short period after incarceration, maybe having support groups for young people after incarceration so that they can better go back and integrate into society, because we see a lot of problems where young people are struggling and failing to be able to go back into society after maybe a certain time in prisons. Thank you very much. I submit.
Thank you very much. Let's take all the questions, colleagues. I'll now ask Caroline Kabiru and then Alvin Gukuta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the presenters for their very insightful presentations. I have two questions, and my first centers on the issue of data that I think all three presenters highlighted, given highlighting the important role of collecting data on both the oversight and any incidents. And I wondered whether, given the value of data-informed processes, there is room for the recognition of the role of academic and research institutions in the prison's oversight processes. And then the other one, it was in terms of reporting requirements. I think there was mention of health professionals having that requirement to report. And I wondered what is the role of chaplaincies as well, who offer counseling and spiritual care, and what reporting mechanisms would be needed for that group. Thanks. And my name is Caroline Kabiru, a researcher from the African Population and Health Research Center, which is based in Nairobi. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much, APHRC. Definitely, you are part of the mix. There was another hand. I thought you'd go naturally with the next. After Caroline, there was another name. Now I see Charmaine Picado. I don't know if I'm missing Charmaine Picado, Linda Puri in Malawi. Who did I miss?
Sorry, Alvin Gukuta is supposed to be the one following.
Yes, please, Alvin. Kindly flow in that manner. Charmaine, take the floor naturally. The consultant has indicated that she's taking notes and will take all your questions, your responses at once.
All
And
right.
then Linda
Thank
Piri.
you so much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Gukuta Alvin. I'm with SRH Africa Trust. And my contribution goes to the different cases in which young people are being criminalized. So we often see young people being punished for crime-related activities, but the criminalization of these adolescents' relationships that are consensual are often labeled as Romeo and Juliet cases, which is actually ruining instead of protecting lives. When you come to realize that probably there are two young people who are of most of the same age range, to say the other one might be 16 and the other one is 17, and the law is supposed to protect, not to destroy, but the current systems that we have towards them are labeling, especially the boy child, as the sex offenders, and that child is going to carry the same stereotype for the whole of his life. That is trauma, which is actually having a human cost. Why? Because boys, particularly those from poor communities that doesn't have legal representation, are going to be incarcerated and carry that stereotype for the rest of their lives. So taking a look at the legal and the human rights perspective of it, we are coming to realize that the African Charter of the Rights and Welfare of Children, as well as the Convention of Rights of the Child, both are actually emphasizing to say the justice system should treat children in a manner which is consistent with their dignity and worth. But if we are now criminalizing them and they are carrying out that label, number one, they are being traumatized. Number two, they are being deprived of their self-esteem in the society because they are carrying that label now and again. So what are we proposing? Or the model is supposed to make sure that the close-in age exemptions are supposed to be there to protect adolescents in consensual sexual relationships that might emanate. For example, if you take a look at the Zimbabwe, we have a 3-year age gap to say, in as much as they have engaged into sexual related activities, what is the age range between the people who have engaged? And the other thing that we are supposed to include, or that we are supposed to be cognizant of when we are formulating these laws, is there is supposed to be clear harmonization of the age of consent of laws across Africa or Southern Africa, to say, to avoid the contradictions that causes legal confusions within the certain jurisdictions that we are dealing with. So to submit.
Thank you very much. Charmaine Picado.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General, and thank you to the presenters and the consultant. So I have two questions, and sorry, my name is Charmaine Picado, and I'm with South AIDS Regional. I'm a Senior Program Officer, SRHR Gender, Media and Communications. And my questions come as a reflection of the presentations that we had earlier, and including the model law on prison oversight, as well as reflections on a regional program that we are rolling out that we call Youth Prison Populations, that we are rolling out in a few Southern African countries. So the first question was looking at institutionalization of meaningful youth participation, especially looking at having structured mechanisms for young people to be able to contribute effectively to monitoring, reporting, and accountability, especially in detention centers. And I say this and looking at how then the model law can strengthen those, because looking at some of the research and the evidence that we have is what is then reported at the national, the regional level differs from what ground once you start to go into the actual prison settings and speak to different demographics, including young people. And then the second question is around adolescents, young people, but particularly adolescents. So looking at their vulnerabilities within detention centers or prison centers, and how then would the model law ensure that their perspectives inform not just oversight, but also the design of their rehabilitation, their reintegration, and most importantly, their psychosocial support programs. So this is diverse adolescents and young people, so LGBTIQ communities, those that are survivors of sexual violence, or those that are undocumented or are going to be incarcerated in a foreign country. Thank you.
Miss Linda Piri, thank you, Charmaine. Linda Piri, then Chifundu Robert.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation that have been presented. I'm Linda P. I'm a member of SRHR African Trust Youth Hub from Malawi. So I wanted to contribute on a point. I think Mr. Kelvin also presented to say that there's a need for rehabilitation over punishment. So in comparing with him, I wanted to say that adolescent needs more care than cells. For example, this has been noted to say that most children who commit crimes, they commit some petty crimes like for survival. And for survival, and also they give off the energy of poverty. For example, let's say a child has committed a crime of maybe stealing, but also maybe just being in the street, and at the end of the day, they are put in cells. So I wanted to say that these crimes are not crimes of violence, but most of the times it just gives symptoms of poverty, neglect, or also social exclusion. So I wanted to emphasize to say that there's a need for the study model to also include this, to say that there's a need for diversions and restorative justice. For example, when I say diversion, I mean like instead of putting those children in the cells, there's a need for them to be just maybe handed over to social work, counseling services, or community services, for them to to be given something more like a second hand chance. But also, I wanted to emphasize to say that you'll find out that a child who committed, let's say, a petty crime for survival, like stealing food, and they're staying longer than they're supposed to stay, like in the cell. So I wanted to say that what if we can also include digital justice and case tracking, because you find out that they're just staying because the files for them are misplaced. At the end of the day, their case is delayed. So I wanted to emphasize to say that there has to be digital justice and tracking, by making sure that all their details from the time that they were arrested to the time that they were released, but also all their details why they were arrested and whatnot, should also be their data should be taken. There has to be put digital, by not just writing them using things that are not digital. This will also help in making sure that their cases are being faster, but also it also help in making sure that people will be able to mark to say this case, this child is supposed to go maybe to the juvenile, or this child is supposed to just go for the social welfare services. And at the end of the day, it means we're going to make sure that instead of we are going to emphasize that children are not just being detained unfairly, but at the end of the day, it means they will be getting the treatment that they're supposed to get. Thank you so much. I wanted to emphasize on that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Linda. Then Mr. Chifundu Robert.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. I think this is one of the important conversations that you should always be having. So I'm Chifundu Robert from Malawi, and of course I'm the member for SAT Youth Hub, and of course I'm also the champion for SRHR here in Malawi. So I think my contribution will pretty much focus on something that I term it as someone to watch these children, more especially in detention. And in other words, it's more or less like maybe I'm trying to propose that there should be an independent oversight and of course accountability for these children in detention. So maybe just to begin with, as you know that in most of SADC regions, in SADC countries, in SADC regions rather, these children and detention remain largely invisible. Okay, while many countries, including Malawi, for example, have human rights institutions, of which a few of them have the mandate and of course have the support, specific support or the fund, more special child-specific mechanism to regulate, monitor, and of course monitor detention conditions or receive the complaints directly from these children. So, for example, in Malawi, as I'm saying, the Human Rights Commission already has a child rights division, and which is also constitutionalized, to be visiting, for example, visiting these children regularly. But apart from this mandate or this direction or this directive, these visits are not that frequent and often funded a component that should be looked into. So much as I submit that as a gap, I have a few, things that I wanted, like maybe to suggest as more or less like to propose that should also be considered. To be considered by the consultant. That should also inform the SADC model law. The first one is that I suppose or I suggest that there has to be legally mandated. It has to be legally mandated to conduct an announced visit to any place where these children are. As I said, this is one of the critical issues that we normally have, apart from having it, having the legal or the institutional framework that pretty guides for the visitation of these children, but we don't see it happening. So I suggest that it has to be mandated that there has to be some sort of this, be it announced or unannounced, and there has to be adequate support, adequate funding, for example, to support the staff that pretty much look at these children in the prisons, for example. And another proposal that I would suggest is that there has to be an integration or integrated child rights oversight into existing human rights institutions. For example, those institutions that I mentioned before. And there has to be the guarantee access and accountability of these, that should be framed in the model. And apart from that, there has to be, maybe this one is also to support what has already been suggested, to say there has to be regular public reporting on these cases. And apart from that, there has to be a creation of regional accountability within SADC to make sure that all things that are supporting these young people, these children in prison, they are pretty much supported as it is supposed to be. So this model should require that every country has an independent children's commissioner, as I said before, or designated child rights unit within the Human Rights Commission with the clear powers to visit all detention facilities and receive complaints directly from children. You know, this is coming the case that I think there hasn't that much that we listen to the children that are in prison. So there has to be that commitment to say we need to be listening to these children. And these oversight bodies must also report annually to Parliament, as I said before, and the public on conditions in child detention. Without visible accountability, and the systems remains closed. And closed systems always fail children. And apart from that, a child behind bars should still have someone watching over their rights, just to make sure that we have the commitment to say each child who is in prison should really have someone that should be watching over them. So those are some of the things that I wanted to share, and of course to submit as a proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. May I kindly have now the Veiko Jeremiah, and then have Mark Chilongo and Rose Peko.
All right.
Did I miss Martha
you very much.
Mwanza? Yeah. I think after then we should have Martha Mwanza, then we go in that order. Thank you. Apologies.
All right. Thank you very much. It's Veiko Jeremiah from Namibia. My contribution is on the early release and the empowerment of offenders. So the practice or the model that is used in Namibia is that inmates do get a chance to get a rehabilitation, to go through rehabilitation program, skill transformation, but then at the end of the day, when they are released, they will just be released into their family care and whatnot. There is no extra support. There is no continuation on when it comes to therapy and whatnot. So I suggest that at least if we can, or the oversight body can emphasize to African states that inmates should be reintegrated into the labor market, whereby they can be able to make means through, to earn income through legal means, rather than just letting them go on conditional release, and at the end of the day, they will end up relapsing into criminal offending because they don't receive any support, especially when one does not have family support. They are more likely to join gangs or seek help from their former friends who are criminals. And that will be my submission for now. Are we together?
Indeed, sir. Indeed, we are together. Mr. Veiko?
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Are you done with your intervention?
Yes,
Oh, thank you
just
so
to
much.
emphasize that.
Yes,
Okay.
I got that. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for representing the men in uniform. May I kindly have our next, I think those will be the last two, Martha Mwanza, and then we have Rose Peko. And then Mark what did Mark Chulongo raise? Yeah. And okay, we have Martha, Mark Chulongo, Rose Peko. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are indeed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us, young people and people in different sectors, to input something in the SADC model. So my contribution or question rather is going to be centered around health. So we're aware that when a person commits a crime, be it young or old, once they step behind the bars, they don't have the full access or the same type of access that people who roam free in the wild have in terms of health. So my contribution is centered on behind bars but still real health. So what I'm asking, oh sorry, my name is Martha Mwanza. I'm coming from Zambia under the Southern Africa Trust, and I'm part of the Youth Hub. So my question or contribution rather is going to be centered on health, which is behind bars but still real health. So my question or my plea as a young person from Zambia is, we're asking if the SADC model can generate the right to comprehensive adolescent care, of which this should include health services such as mental health and chronic conditions. Being in a new environment, you have to adapt to the things that are happening to you, and everything that the child goes to face or experience is a whole different world and a whole different environment. And as such, it's going to affect their mental health, which can later lead to different chronic conditions, considering they are in a place that doesn't have well sanitation, they don't have clean and safe drinking water. And as such, we plea that the healthcare systems in prisons should be delivered by qualified health professionals. Yes, we have people who are in uniform that are health professionals, but we ask if they can be other healthcare professionals who are well qualified to be in those spaces, who come from the Ministry of Health. And the other thing is we ask that all incarcerated children by law have their health and well-being checked twice a year by an external party. This is with full independence from the prison itself, or the prison system rather. Knowing that they don't have the full access to healthcare services, we're asking if the law or the model can have a sector that's going to talk about health and focus on their well-being. They should be able to get full access to health services. That includes, these services should be youth-friendly centered. They should be able to speak to the healthcare provider in a free and well confidential manner, where they can share the problems that they're facing and the different situations that may lead to the particular condition or disease that they may have been exposed to. And the other thing is going to be in relation in terms of data collection and how the data is being interpreted when it's been collected. So there should be an anonymous data collection that should be done by the National Prisons Commissioner to the Parliament on an annual basis. When we have the annual data collection, it's going to help us collect or figure out the gaps and how we're able to fill in those gaps as to what's needed for these young people in the prisons. This is my main contribution, my question, and my plea to the SADC model law. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak out and speak for people who are in prisons and people that need health and other services at their doorsteps, even if they're in prisons. Because we all know to say health is a human right and each and every person is entitled to it. Thank you so much. This was my short contribution. I hope you take it into consideration.
Thank you, Martha. May we have our next intervention, please?
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mark Chilonguchea. I'm working for an organization called Africa Directions, which advances children and young people's rights in Zambia. I just, from the conversations, and I just want to be to also send my heartfelt gratitude to the presenters, and also just highlighting some of the oversights in terms of young people in prisons. And I think we're all speaking almost the same language in terms of how we can ensure that we enhance the rights of children and young people, especially those that are incarcerated. So I wanted to quickly just make mention from the presentations, and at some point I was losing the network. Does the SADC model law also looks at the issue of infrastructure? Because in Zambia, we have challenges when it comes to infrastructure, and because the prisons are very small and some of them were built pre or after independence, so you find that there's a lot of overcrowding. The poor infrastructure itself can also impede some of these issues that we were talking about. And we also feel like the tendency of just to focus solely on internal prison programming, such as rehabilitation and education, without adequately addressing the infrastructure needs, we feel that this can actually impede progress in as much as we're trying to ensure that we deal with that. So this approach can lead to a situation where rehabilitation efforts are hampered by poor living conditions in the prisons, inadequate facilities, just like my other previous caller mentioned, and also other health risks. We've seen a number of health risks that happen when there's overcrowding and just what goes on in prisons, you know, and then ultimately that would be limiting the effectiveness of any reform initiatives that we would want to undertake. So I thought I should just bring up this question. Are we really also emphasizing on this model? Are we really emphasizing on the infrastructure? Because without improving infrastructure such as sanitation, you know, healthcare facilities within the prison, just internal programming alone cannot achieve the sustainable improvements that we are discussing. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much. Allow me to kindly close the speaking list or intervention list now and hand over to the consultants. I'd also like to assure those online that we have seen your comments, we have seen your requests, and the teams that are online supporting the consultant and the SADC PF will take note of these and actually reach out to you in that regard. Mr. Mark Shilongo, have I left you? Your hand is up still?
Oh, no. Let me.
Okay.
I think Rose's hand was still up.
Oh, yes. Rose, kindly take the floor before I close. Thank you for that reminder.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My question or addition rather, it's more of, in as much as we're focusing on the adolescents in prison, how are we addressing the root causes as of like why they got there, why they're even in prison, poverty, social system, how are we supporting them adequately before they even get to the point where they resort to risky behaviors. For example, we have our school dropouts. How do we immediately intervene and help those adolescents before they tend to risky behaviors that end up leading them into prison and having to deal with an environment which is not healthy for their well-being? That is my.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for those valuable contributions. I now hand over to our consultant who has a very onerous task to solving everybody else's problem. She called you to a consultation, and now I hope she'll be able to say how far and to what extent can she meet your expectations or find another opportunity that would take these to the next level. Thank you very much, Ms. Anneke. Kindly take the floor.
Thanks, Honorable. And thank you, everyone, for the lovely comments. It's certainly given me some food for thought. I think all of us here are very worried about how do we support people and youth specifically before things escalate and get worse. Rose, I wish we could deal with your comment in the actual model law, because the model law only deals with prison oversight, but I think your comment is absolutely critical, and I'm going to speak a bit to that, but let me go bit by bit through what people had said. So there was the point about there was an initial point made about how do we why are we focusing on youth, and what about youth who committed serious crime? I think the point about prison oversight is that it's for oversight bodies to ensure that conditions in detentions are met, that laws are complied with. It is irrelevant what crime someone committed. They are serving the sentence by being incarcerated. That doesn't mean that they don't have the right to not be tortured, the right to not to complain, and all those sort of things. So people who are incarcerated are already serving their sentence, and the oversight is to ensure that those conditions in which they find themselves are compliant with the law. But it's important to note that not all persons in detention are actually convicted persons. In many countries, up to 50% of our prisons are filled with people who have not yet been found guilty of any crime. So that's important to just note, that we're dealing here with the fundamental principles of ensuring that laws and standards are being met. Our colleague from Zimbabwe, Denzel, you made a critical point about life skills training, and many other colleagues, Rose, I think it deals with what you had said, but also what Linda had mentioned and what others had mentioned as well. And the same with Mr. Jeremiah, is that we cannot release young people and just not provide them with follow-up support. And this is a huge gap. And I would think within the model law, the most we can do is ensure that prison oversight bodies are trained to ask the right questions about how is the prison ensuring that once someone is released, they are referred to the appropriate mental and psychosocial health support that they need. And that this then becomes a key question even during parliamentary oversight, because we all know that parliaments grapple with the budgets of prisons and what to fund. And I think in terms of Rose's question about really the root cause of crime, is that we need to support people. And everyone's a human being, and recognize that people find themselves in difficult situations, and that there's a need to budget for rehabilitation. And our colleague from the DRC raised the important point about that rehabilitation and training and skills should also be offered to all persons in prison, and often men benefit from it, but foreign nationals might be excluded from that training, or women might be excluded from that training. So it's important that that training and support is extended, and we can add something on that. The issue about referral mechanisms in respect of health services specifically, I think is critical. And and this is something that is dealt with within the model law about referral processes, and how there's a duty on health professionals to ensure that that referral and support happens. I think what is there was a linked up thing there, that the point was made about these health institutions, and I think, Martha, you made this point, that we need independent services to provide some of that mental health and health services support, and that it is provided by the Ministry of Health. This is an issue that has come up repeatedly, and I think a model or a good practice recommendation in the model law would indeed be that health services are provided by the Department of Health itself, because that way it's also easier for prisoners to be open about the challenges they face when they speak to their health workers and to health professionals within the system. There was a lot of comments, and I found this really refreshing, around data collection itself, and what sort of data we collect, and how we provide feedback, and how we include academics within that support system for data collection, which at the moment is lacking. And I agree that we need to have a provision specifically around academia within the model law. And Charmaine made a very important point about how sometimes data can obscure the problem, where you don't just need national data. And if we just give Parliament national data, they might think everything's fine, but it doesn't raise the specific problems that happens at regional levels, and the nuances at different regional levels, at prisons, at different districts, and all those sort of things. And that we need to ensure we have detailed and disaggregated data. And linked to that also, I think Chifunda made the important point, Chifunda, about funding of oversight bodies. We have specifically made recommendations around that within the model law. There's one, and there was a point by Alvin about the Romeo and Juliet cases, and these are really cases where the law allows for mandatory sentencing of youth who have been in consensual relationships with each other. And obviously that's a huge concern, and many countries are starting to reform those laws. It's not something you can deal with in the model law, but there is an urgent need for law reform around those issues in many countries. What we will definitely include, and I think, Chifunda, this is very valuable, is the need for oversight bodies to either have a children's unit within them that can look at the issues of children, or for there to be a separate children's council that deals with those issues. I want to flag one thing, that not all countries in SADC have adopted child justice principles. So in terms of child justice principles, when we speak about prisons, there ought to be no children in them, because children ought to have been referred somewhere else. And a big task of oversight bodies would be to ensure that immediately when they find children within facilities, that they actually immediately address that issue and refer them to a more appropriate facility. So there are a lot of so in relation to children in detention, there is some discontinuity between different countries in terms of how that is managed. And I think what we would focus on would probably be to put some key principles out there. And even in a country where there is space for children to be incarcerated, that ought to obviously be as a last resort, and oversight bodies should take specific note of it and inquire into the reasons for such incarceration. So I think overall, I've taken very detailed notes. All of this will be included. Just one last point, Mark, you raised the critical point of infrastructure, and I want to thank you for doing that. Initially, we weren't sure what to do with the issue of infrastructure, but I almost feel that it ought to be that every parliament comes up with some sort of progressive plan on how they will budget for and improve infrastructure over a period of time. And this could be something that we can actually suggest perhaps to parliaments. I'm not sure whether in the model law or in some other sort of document, but that one cannot just continue working on the basis that we stay with colonial era prisons. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that answered some of your questions.
Thank you very much. And I like what you ended with. The issue of infrastructure seems to be very critical. Perhaps we could come up with an innovation. I'm sure you'll think about it, where every time there's a question asked in Parliament or the minister comes to present the budget, they may indicate something about what they're doing when they're discussing the broader infrastructure of roads and other things, maybe to have a commentary on that so that we keep it on the radar. Having said that, I believe that we are... Martha, do you still want to speak? Or it's an earlier hand? Okay. I believe it's an earlier hand. Okay. Now that we have almost heard from the consultant, I would like to invite two colleagues to have any parting words briefly. Mr. Chira Matloku from Stepping Stones International, and then Ms. Umkle Ntsingala from Right to Project. If they're here.
Shira is here.
All right, great, Shira. Kindly go ahead and just give us your parting words to your colleagues here.
Yes, I think one of the things that when I got an invite to be a part of this meeting was to probably share our experience from Botswana in the area around. We did a research called Assessing the State of Child-Friendly Justice System in Botswana. And we had a chance to engage with young people, children in detention center, and hear from them their experience going through the justice system. And it's a research. I will share the link. I'll share the link to the research, and then it can be shared with colleagues online. But I just selected some parts that I thought I can speak to, that I think could be important in the model law that the team is working towards. I think first of all, is to always consider that when you work with children, it has to be in a child-friendly manner as a principle. And the child-friendly principle towards working with children is often overlooked because you have to be trained as a service provider to understand the child-friendly service provision. And we did come across that it was a principle unknown to a lot of stakeholders we engaged during our research. And I feel this should be taken into consideration when working on the SADC model law. The other thing is to ensure, to keep in the back of the minds that working with children who have committed an offense, the primary intention is to rehabilitate them. And often at times, professionals working or providing services to children who have offended, they treat children like criminals. And they overlook the fact that they have to be rehabilitated and brought back into the system. And even when working with the police, we did understand from them that, listen, when we get children, our intention is to prove that they have committed an offense, not to handle them in this child-friendly manner that you guys talk about. So they often find themselves violating a lot of principles when handling with children or with youth. And I think that's something that can be taken into consideration. Socialization. I heard somebody talk about, so what do we expect, or how do we expect to treat children who have committed offenses and heinous crimes for that matter? And child-friendly principle still applies to any child who commits an offense. And I'd like to also say that children are often failed by their families. Children are meant to be socialized. They're meant to be crafted to go through life by elders, by parents. And this is an assumption that children are in a family. Some children are not in families. So once they get into the justice system, it's a pathway that goes away from their dreams. They divert from their dreams. So we have to always ensure that we understand the background where children are going. So family is important for children in Africa, for children in SADC to think about where they're coming from, because children from broken homes always end in the justice system in most cases. Oftentimes, people or systems or governments focus on training for skill as thinking that is a good way towards replacing rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is expensive, and governments need to be deliberate in investing in rehabilitation and done by professionals. And we realize that, I'll give you for an example, maybe in Botswana, I don't think we have more than 6 or 7 clinical psychologists employed by government to offer clinical psychology services. I don't think there are more than 10, the whole country. So it's an area that colleagues need to also look into their governments and check how has government invested in having the right professionals, the clinical psychologists, the psychiatrists, the therapists, the people trained in rehabilitation, there are rehabilitation nurses, there are rehabilitation clinics. So we have to be deliberate in ensuring that we focus on rehabilitation. Training for skill is still good. And I look into an example as in like in Botswana, we have a place called Ikago, School of Industry. So you can even tell from way back, the thinking around it was that when you train a child or give them a skill, you will get them out of bad ways. And that's not the case. Rehabilitate somebody, then train them for skills so that they can have something to fall on. I'll also speak to education. When we came across some of the children who were incarcerated, their educational needs fell off. But children have to be in school, children have to learn. And some of them who came into those rehabilitation places at primary school level dropped out of school because there was no one facilitating for them to be in school, whilst others were there in schools. Some were not in schools, and they did not know. And I think one of the important things that we also have to look into is around child participation. It's often overlooked. People don't engage children on issues that affect them. So let us take that into consideration. Some face the challenge of not having legal representation. And our legal aid service is slowly growing. And in the past, it meant that when children commit an offense, they commit an offense against the state, and the state is represented by the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution. And for the children, they have to look for legal representation for themselves or their families. And often it's families that can't afford such. So it took a lot of advocacy work to ensure that children get to be assisted by legal aid. And not only those, you'd also find processes within the legal aid where one has to be assessed to check if they qualify for legal aid services, because it's meant for people with a certain socioeconomic status. So you might find that some won't even qualify for that, and it does not mean that they can still afford good legal representation. So that needs to be taken into consideration. And then I just wanted to also talk about profiling of them as they come in. And I think these are just the selected parts of stuff that I wanted to talk about. And I think in the best interest of time, I'll just stop there, and then I will share the report with you, and it can inform the work that is being done. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matluku. I think we appreciate your solid parting words around children. These are discussions that have been had previously. I think the consultant has indeed heard you, and if she would like to say something, she would, but you do have representation in the technical working group as well, I'm aware. Thank you so much for that. Is that the only parting words that we're having now? Are we having Ms. Untle Nsingala in the afternoon session or now?
Umhle is here.
May she kindly take the floor? Okay, I guess we can have her in the afternoon if that is okay. I would like to just thank everyone for coming through for this particular consultation. For the SADC Parliamentary Forum, this is quite important. I would like to encourage you to look through the SADC PF website. you will find there the various Bill of Rights or model laws that have been developed, from HIV and AIDS to elections to public financial management, eradicating child marriages and protecting children in marriage, the model law on gender-based violence. You will note that all these model laws have been developed in a similar process. We've gone through the initiation stage, we are in the drafting stage, we are going to have the approval stage, and we're going to have the domestication stage, where countries now who have participated in this process are able to look at what they can incorporate into their national laws. We have gone through this process where committees at regional level have validated this particular development of the model law. We are yet to go to the second approval stage, but they reviewed at that time the thinking around this model law, the issues that you are raising today. Some of them found their way to the committee stage and approval was given. We are now going to expected to get next year to the plenary adoption stage, where now all the SADC parliaments will be able to say this is entirely what we would like to see and this is what is doable. We encourage you to find your members of parliament, committees of parliament, chairpersons of parliaments who are dealing with this particular issue of prison or children or women, whatever the case may be, and do your advocacy. I've noted that you come from very solid organizations. You yourselves are advocates in your own rights and will appreciate if you can do that to make sure that the issues that you are raising, when they see them in whatever shape or form, they appreciate the context with which we are. So now you are part of the stakeholder engagement. These are just few. Parliaments will continue to be consulted. Justice systems, judiciary prosecutors will continue. We just came from a meeting where they were consultants. Prison authorities and management correctional officers will be consulted. Human rights bodies, former prisoners. This is just some of the consultations that will happen. I've had academia raising their hands and researchers raising their hand. I believe that you will be consulted and you are also invited to all these sessions so that you can assist us in that regard. Now we are having a calendar. In October, it's a month where we're definitely just going to be doing these consultations. We are done with the 2 consultations in 8th of October. 9 to 10 of October was another consultation. Today we have 2 consultations. Tomorrow we have 2 consultations. On the 16th, we also have consultations. Please go to our website. You'll find the consultations that have been listed there. 17th, 20th, the list continues. We'll stop on the 21st of October so that the consultants can go back and incorporate some of these issues. So as part of concluding, I wish to state that parliaments or parliamentarism around the world is perhaps the most important ingredient for the survival of democracy nowadays. Parliamentarism brings transparency, checks and balances, and above all, the accountability of those holding public functions. Now, inclusive within the notion of parliamentarism is youth parliamentarism, youth engagement, which is equally important to the perennial life of any democracy. With these, I'd like to thank you for being the game changer in this regard. We had the highest number of consultations with youth. You already have hit about 80 for this particular session and would like to thank you. Please continue to mobilize young people through your institutions and make sure that your input remains alive. If you want to send any email, please send to the following email, prisons@sadcpf.org. The consultants will have access to this email and your input will be taken on board. Some have referred to some requests on the chat. Please feel free to email and we'll attend to your particular request. At this point, let me thank the consultant for making it very easy for us to appreciate what the drafting process is about. Thank you very much, Anneke and your team, and may I kindly request that we terminate the session for now. For those of you who have energy, we have another consultation at 15 hours where we are consulting women organizations and women caucuses in Parliament, among others. Have a great afternoon. Admin, kindly terminate.
Thank you.